I never thought a snowstorm would turn into the most expensive lesson of my neighbor's life. But when I saw that pressure washing invoice come out of her HOA expense account, I knew karma had finally caught up with Patricia Cunningham. Let me back up to January when this whole mess started. I'm Quentin Harlow, and I bought my townhouse in Pleasant Ridge Estates in Columbus, Ohio about 3 years ago. The place was perfect for a single guy like me, close to work, decent neighbors, and a manageable mortgage payment. The only downside was the homeowners association, which seemed to exist solely to make residents miserable. Patricia Cunningham had been on the HOA board for nearly a decade, and she ran it like her own personal fiefdom. Patricia was exactly what you'd expect from an HOA Karen. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon even when she was just checking mailboxes. And she had this way of looking at you like you'd personally insulted her grandmother. Her hair was always perfectly styled in that generic suburban mom cut, blonde with highlights that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She drove a white Lexus SUV that she parked diagonally across 2 spots in the visitor parking because, according to her, she didn't want anyone dinging her doors. The winter had been brutal that year. We'd already gotten 2 feet of snow in December, and January wasn't letting up. I'd been diligent about clearing my front porch and the walkway leading to my door, just like the HOA rules required. The regulations stated that homeowners had to clear snow within 24 hours of a snowfall or face a $50 fine. Patricia had already hit 3 people on our street with violations, so I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of adding me to that list. The morning of January 15th started like any other snow day. I woke up at 6, made myself some coffee, and looked out my front window to assess the damage. We'd gotten about 8 inches overnight, which wasn't terrible but still required some serious shoveling. I bundled up, grabbed my snow shovel from the garage, and got to work. It took me about 45 minutes to clear my porch steps and walkway. By the time I finished, my back was aching and my fingers were numb despite my gloves, but everything looked good. Clean concrete, neat piles of snow on either side of the walkway, well within my property boundaries. I went inside, took a hot shower to warm up, and got ready for work. I'm a software engineer for a healthcare company downtown, and even with the snow, they expected us in the office that day. The roads were cleared enough that the drive only took me an extra 15 minutes. Work was the usual mix of meetings and coding, nothing exciting. I stayed until about 6 because I was in the middle of debugging something that was driving me crazy, and I didn't want to leave it unfinished. When I pulled into my parking spot at Pleasant Ridge Estates around 6:30, the sun had already set. The streetlights illuminated the snow-covered landscape, making everything look peaceful and pristine. I grabbed my laptop bag from the passenger seat and headed toward my front door. That's when I noticed something was very wrong. My porch, which I had meticulously cleared that morning, was now buried under a massive pile of dirty gray snow. This wasn't fresh snow from another storm. This was the disgusting, compacted salt and dirt-mixed snow that accumulates on the sides of roads and driveways. Someone had deliberately dumped it on my porch, and there was so much of it that it was piled nearly 3 feet high against my front door. I stood there for a moment, my breath forming clouds in the cold air, trying to process what I was seeing. The snow pile covered not just my porch, but also my welcome mat, my 2 potted evergreens that I kept by the door, and it was packed so tightly against the door that I wasn't even sure I could open it. Brown streaks of mud mixed with the gray ice, and I could see bits of road gravel embedded throughout. It looked absolutely disgusting, and more importantly, there was no way this had happened naturally. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, examining the area more closely. That's when I noticed the tracks. Tire tracks from what looked like a small utility vehicle or ATV led right up to my porch, and I could see where someone had used a plow or shovel to push the snow directly onto my property. The tracks led back across the small courtyard area and disappeared around the corner toward the HOA maintenance shed. My mind immediately went to Patricia. She'd been giving me dirty looks ever since I'd refused to vote for her proposal to increase HOA fees by 30% last year. The proposal had failed by a narrow margin, and she'd made it clear she knew exactly who had voted against her. She'd started finding petty violations to cite me for. Everything from my trash can being visible from the street for 10 minutes past the 7 a.m. pickup window to claiming my mailbox needed repainting when it was perfectly fine. But this was beyond petty. This was deliberate property damage and harassment. I walked around the side of the snow pile, trying to find a way to access my door. I ended up having to climb over a section of the railing and squeeze past to get my key in the lock. The door only opened about 6 inches before it hit the packed snow. I had to push hard, using my shoulder to force it open wide enough to slip inside. Snow and dirty ice tumbled into my entryway, melting immediately on my hardwood floors. Once inside, I dropped my bag and stood there, dripping and angry. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures through the doorway, documenting everything. The massive pile, the tire tracks, the damage to my potted plants which were now completely buried and probably crushed. I took photos from multiple angles, making sure to timestamp them. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but explained that unless I had direct evidence of who did it, there wasn't much they could do. It would be considered a civil matter, basically a neighbor dispute. She suggested I document everything and consider filing a complaint with the HOA or taking civil action if I could prove who was responsible. I thanked her and hung up, frustrated but not surprised. Next, I called my buddy Marcus, who lived 2 streets over in the same development. Marcus had his own issues with Patricia. She tried to fine him for having a wreath on his door that was supposedly the wrong shade of red according to some obscure holiday decoration guideline she'd invented. He answered on the second ring. "Quentin, what's up, man?" "Marcus, you're not going to believe this. Someone dumped a massive pile of dirty snow on my porch. I'm talking 3 feet high, completely blocking my door." "What? Are you serious? When did this happen?" "Sometime between this morning and now. I cleared everything before work and I just got home to this mess." "That's insane. Who would do something like that?" "I've got a pretty good idea. Patricia Cunningham." The tire tracks lead back toward the HOA maintenance shed, and you know she's the only one with access to that equipment. Marcus let out a low whistle. "Man, she really has it out for you. What are you going to do?" "Right now, I need to clear this mess before it freezes solid. It's already starting to ice over, but I'm documenting everything. I've got photos, I've called the police to report it, and I'm going to start building a case. If I can prove it was her, I'm going to make sure she pays for this. You need help? I can come over with my shovel." "Actually, that would be great. And if you could bring your camera, I want someone else taking photos too. The more documentation, the better. Give me 15 minutes. While I waited for Marcus, I changed into dry clothes and grabbed my shovel again. I also got out my digital camera, which took higher quality photos than my phone. I went back outside through the garage this time and started documenting everything again with the better camera. I took close-ups of the tire tracks, measured the width with a tape measure, and photographed the distinctive tread pattern. I measured the size of the snow pile and took photos showing how it was clearly dirty road snow, not the fresh stuff from last night's storm. Marcus showed up right on time, carrying his shovel and a small video camera. "Dude, this is crazy," he said, staring at the pile. "This had to take some serious effort. This isn't just someone tossing a shovelful over. This is deliberate." "Exactly. Help me get this on video, walk around, show everything." Marcus spent 10 minutes recording the scene, narrating what he was seeing, pointing out the tracks, the type of snow, the damage to my property. It felt a bit like filming a crime scene documentary, but I was grateful to have the evidence. Once he finished, we both started shoveling. Even with two of us working, it took nearly 2 hours to clear all the snow. My arms were shaking by the end, and we'd both worked up a serious sweat despite the cold. The damage assessment wasn't good. Both of my potted evergreens were crushed, their branches broken under the weight of the snow. The pots themselves had cracked. My welcome mat was shredded, probably torn up by whatever vehicle they'd used to push the snow. There were deep scrapes in the concrete of my porch where the plow blade had hit, and the paint on my door frame was chipped in several places where ice had been forced against it. "This is going to cost you a fortune to fix," Marcus said, examining the scrapes on the concrete. "Yeah, and I'm going to make sure Patricia pays for every penny of it." The next morning, I got up early and sent a formal written complaint to the HOA board via email and certified mail. I detailed exactly what had happened, attached all of my photos and the video Marcus had taken, and demanded an investigation. I specifically mentioned the tire tracks leading to the maintenance shed and requested access to any security camera footage from the common areas. I also stated that I would be pursuing legal action to recover damages and that I expected a response within 5 business days. The response came much faster than I expected, but not from Patricia. At 10 a.m., I got a call from Gerald Morrison, another board member who I'd actually voted for in the last election. Gerald was a retired accountant, reasonable and fair, and he'd often been the voice of sanity when Patricia went on her power trips. "Quentin, I got your email and the photos. This is really disturbing. I want you to know that I'm taking this seriously." "Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate that. I've already started looking into it. We do have some security cameras in the common areas, but I need to get access to the footage." Patricia usually handles that since she's the board president, but given that she's potentially involved, I think we need to go around her. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. Do I need to be there? You'll be invited to present your case, yes. 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. In the meantime, I'd recommend getting estimates for the damage repairs. Document everything, keep all your receipts. Already on it. I've got a contractor coming this afternoon to look at the porch. Good. Quentin, between you and me, Patricia has been getting worse lately. There have been other complaints, nothing quite this severe, but there's a pattern of behavior. This might be the thing that finally gets her removed from the board. That afternoon, a local contractor named Bill who specialized in concrete work came by to assess the damage. He was a big guy with a gray beard, probably in his early 60s, and he'd been doing this kind of work for 30 years. He walked around my porch, examined the scrapes, looked at the broken pots, and shook his head. "Someone really did a number on you here. These scrapes are deep. They went right through the sealer. You're going to need the whole porch resurfaced and resealed. Otherwise, water's going to get in those cracks, and when it freezes, it'll just make everything worse. What's that going to cost?" He pulled out a calculator and started punching numbers. "For the resurfacing and sealing, you're looking at about $1,200. That's materials and labor. The pots and plants, that's on you to replace, but I'd say another 100 or so. The welcome mat, whatever that costs. The door frame, I can touch up the paint for another $50. Call it $1,350 total for my work. I tried not to wince. That was a lot of money for something that wasn't my fault. Can you put that in writing? I need a formal estimate. Sure thing. I'll email it to you tonight. You want me to go ahead and schedule the work? Not yet. I need to see how this plays out with the HOA, but I'll definitely be calling you. After Bill left, I spent some time researching Ohio HOA law and what my rights were in this situation. I learned that HOA board members could be held personally liable for damages if they abused their position or engaged in harassment. I also found out that I could potentially sue both Patricia personally and the HOA as an organization, depending on whether she was acting in her official capacity or not. The tire tracks leading to the HOA maintenance shed suggested she'd used HOA property and equipment, which meant this wasn't just a personal vendetta. She'd involved the organization. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head, preparing for the board meeting, thinking about what I'd say and how Patricia would respond. I knew she'd deny everything, play the victim, try to turn it around on me somehow. That was her pattern. The next day at work, I was distracted and unfocused. My manager noticed and pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay. I gave him the short version of what happened, and he was appropriately outraged on my behalf. He told me to take whatever time I needed to deal with it, and even offered to write a statement if needed, since I'd been at work during the time the snow was dumped. I thanked him and made a mental note to get that statement in writing. At 6:30 that evening, I gathered all my documentation, loaded it onto my laptop, and drove to the Pleasant Ridge Estates clubhouse. The clubhouse was a modest building near the front entrance of the development, used for board meetings and occasional resident events. When I arrived, several cars were already in the parking lot, including Patricia's white Lexus. Inside, the main room had been set up with a table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. I was surprised to see that at least a dozen other residents had shown up. Apparently, word had gotten around about what happened, and people were interested in seeing how this played out. Marcus was there, along with a few other neighbors from my street. The board members filed in and took their seats. Besides Patricia and Gerald, there were three others. Linda Chen, who worked in real estate, Tom Bradford, a lawyer who handled mostly corporate law, and Susan Matthews, a nurse at Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. Patricia sat in the center, looking as imperious as always. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer over a black turtleneck, and her expression was cold and dismissive. Gerald called the meeting to order and explained that we were here to address my complaint. He invited me to come forward and present my case. I brought my laptop up to the front and connected it to the projector they had set up. Then I walked everyone through what had happened, showing the photos I'd taken when I first arrived home, the video Marcus had recorded, close-ups of the tire tracks, and the damage to my property. I explained my timeline, showed the timestamp on the photos I'd taken that morning of my clean porch, and the ones from that evening showing the massive pile. As you can see, I said, pointing to the screen showing the tire tracks, these tracks lead directly to the HOA maintenance shed. The width and tread pattern are consistent with the small utility plow that we use for clearing sidewalks in the common areas. That vehicle is kept locked in the maintenance shed, and according to our bylaws, only board members have keys to that shed. Patricia leaned forward, her voice sharp. This is completely circumstantial. Anyone could have made those tracks. You're just looking for someone to blame for what was probably a prank by neighborhood kids. With respect, Patricia, kids don't have access to HOA equipment, and this wasn't just a shovelful of snow. This was a deliberate, sustained effort to dump approximately 3 cubic yards of dirty road snow onto my property. Someone used a plow to do this. Tom Bradford, the lawyer, spoke up. Quentin, do you have any direct evidence that identifies who actually operated the vehicle? Not yet, which is why I requested access to the security camera footage. We have cameras that cover the maintenance shed area. If someone accessed that shed yesterday between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., it should be on camera. All eyes turned to Patricia, who controlled access to the security system. She shifted in her seat, her expression tight. I checked the footage. There's nothing relevant on it. Then I'd like to see it myself, I said firmly. With all due respect, given that you're a potential suspect, you shouldn't be the only one reviewing that evidence. Gerald nodded. I agree. Patricia, we need to see that footage. This is a serious allegation and we need to be thorough. Patricia's face flushed red. This is absurd. I'm being accused of something completely ridiculous based on tire tracks that could have come from anywhere. This is a waste of the board's time. Linda Chen, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Actually, Patricia, I drove past Quentin's townhouse around 3 p.m. yesterday. I was coming back from showing a house in the neighborhood, and I saw the HOA utility plow parked right in front of his unit. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed someone was clearing snow from the common areas. But now that I'm seeing these photos, that timing seems very relevant. The room went completely silent. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. You must be mistaken about the time. I'm not. I remember because I had a 4 o'clock appointment, and I was checking my watch to make sure I wasn't running late. It was definitely around 3. Gerald looked at Patricia with an expression I couldn't quite read. Patricia, were you operating the utility plow yesterday afternoon? I don't have to answer that. This is turning into some kind of witch hunt. I'm the president of this board, and I don't appreciate being interrogated like a criminal. Tom Bradford leaned back in his chair, his lawyer instincts clearly kicking in. Patricia, if you operated HOA equipment for personal reasons or to harass a resident, that's a serious violation of your fiduciary duty as a board member. It could expose you to personal liability and potentially expose the HOA to liability as well. I strongly suggest you cooperate with this investigation. There's nothing to investigate. Patricia's voice had risen to nearly a shout. This is all speculation and circumstantial evidence. You're all just looking for an excuse to undermine my leadership. Susan Matthews, who had been watching the whole exchange with a troubled expression, finally spoke. Patricia, I've been on this board for 2 years now, and I've seen you become increasingly aggressive toward residents who don't agree with you. Last month, you tried to fine the Johnsons because their Christmas lights were supposedly too bright, even though they were identical to lights that other people had up. You've been targeting people, and everyone knows it. How dare you, Patricia hissed. I've been dedicated to this community for 10 years. I've kept property values high. I've maintained standards, and this is the thanks I get. Gerald held up his hand. Everyone, let's calm down. Patricia, I'm going to make a formal motion. I move that the board immediately access the security camera footage from January 15th, and that this footage be reviewed by an independent third party, if necessary. I also move that we temporarily suspend Patricia's access to HOA equipment and facilities pending the outcome of this investigation. I second the motion, Linda said immediately. All in favor? Gerald asked. Linda, Tom, and Susan all said aye simultaneously. Patricia sat rigid in her chair, her jaw clenched tight. The motion passed 4-1. This is ridiculous, Patricia said, standing up abruptly. You're all going to regret this. I'll have my lawyer look into whether this board even has the authority to suspend my access to anything." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The door slammed behind her, and everyone sat in stunned silence for a moment. Gerald let out a long breath. "Well, that could have gone better. Quentin, we're going to get to the bottom of this. I'll personally review the security footage tonight, and I'll have our property management company pull the access logs for the maintenance shed. We'll know within 24 hours who accessed that shed and when." "Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate you taking this seriously." "Of course. And regardless of how this turns out, I want to apologize on behalf of the board. If one of our members did this, it's completely unacceptable, and we'll make sure you're compensated for the damages." After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to offer their support. Apparently, Patricia had been targeting various people for months, and my situation had become a lightning rod for everyone's frustration. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder and told me he thought it went well, all things considered. I drove home feeling a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Patricia wasn't the type to go down without a fight. The next morning I was getting ready for work when my phone rang. It was Gerald. "Quentin, I reviewed the security footage last night. You're going to want to see this." My heart started pounding. "What did you find?" Patricia accessed the maintenance shed at 2:45 p.m. on January 15th. The camera clearly shows her unlocking the shed, taking out the utility plow, and driving it off in the direction of your unit. She returned at 3:50 p.m. and put the equipment back. The timestamp on the footage is absolutely clear. I felt a surge of satisfaction. So we have her dead to rights. There's more. I also pulled the fuel logs. That plow is supposed to be logged every time it's used, with notes about what area was being cleared and why. There's no entry for January 15th. She used HOA equipment without authorization and without documenting it, and based on Linda's testimony and your photos, we know what she used it for. What happens now? I'm calling another emergency board meeting for tonight. Patricia will be formally asked to resign from the board. If she refuses, we'll hold a vote to remove her. And frankly, given what's on this footage, I don't think she'll have much choice. I'm also recommending that the HOA's insurance company be notified, and that we authorize payment for your damages from HOA funds, since this was done using HOA equipment. Gerald, I really appreciate this. I know this can't be easy for you. It's not, but it's the right thing to do. Patricia crossed a line, and she needs to face the consequences. That evening's board meeting was much shorter and much more tense than the previous one. Patricia showed up with a lawyer, a severe-looking woman in an expensive suit, who immediately started making noise about proper procedures and due process. But when Gerald played the security footage on the projector, showing Patricia clear as day taking the utility plow and driving away with it, her lawyer's expression changed. She leaned over and had a whispered conversation with Patricia that lasted several minutes. Finally, Patricia stood up, her face tight and controlled. "I'm tendering my resignation from the board effective immediately. However, I maintain that my actions were taken in good faith as part of my duties to maintain community standards." Mr. Harlow had left snow on his property that morning that was in violation of our regulations. "That's not true," I said immediately. "I have photos showing that my porch was completely clear when I left for work." Her lawyer put a hand on Patricia's arm, clearly signaling her to stop talking. "My client has resigned. We'll be happy to work with the board to address any outstanding issues through appropriate channels." Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The HOA's insurance company got involved, and after reviewing all the evidence, they agreed to cover my damages. They cut me a check for $1,500, which covered Bill's estimate plus some extra for the plants and mat. The insurance company also sent Patricia a letter explaining that they would be seeking reimbursement from her personally, since she had used HOA equipment for an unauthorized personal purpose. But the real surprise came about 2 weeks later. I got a call from Gerald, who sounded both amused and amazed. "Quentin, you're not going to believe this. Remember how I said the insurance company would be seeking reimbursement from Patricia?" "Yeah, what about it?" "Well, they sent her a bill for the full amount, plus their administrative costs and the cost of the investigation. About $2,000 total. And here's the kicker. She apparently set up autopay on her HOA account for anything related to property maintenance. She did it months ago so she wouldn't have to manually approve every little expense. The bill got coded as a property maintenance expense, and it automatically paid out of her HOA account." I started laughing. "You're kidding me." "She paid for the damage she caused to my property out of her own account without even realizing it. That's exactly what happened. By the time she noticed, the payment had already cleared. Her lawyer is trying to get it reversed, but good luck with that. The insurance company has it documented as reimbursement for unauthorized use of HOA equipment. It's completely legitimate. This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. It gets better. The insurance company is also billing her separately for the increase in our premiums that resulted from this incident. That's another $500. And since she's no longer on the board, she can't do anything about it." After I hung up with Gerald, I sat back on my couch and just smiled. Sometimes karma works in the most unexpected and satisfying ways. Patricia had tried to make my life miserable, had deliberately damaged my property out of spite, and in the end, she'd paid for it all herself. Not only that, but she'd lost her position on the board. Her reputation in the community was destroyed, and she was facing higher HOA fees just like everyone else she'd tried to bully. The story spread through Pleasant Ridge estates like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew what had happened. I'd see neighbors in the parking lot or at the mailboxes, and they'd give me knowing smiles or thumbs up. A few people even came by to personally thank me for standing up to Patricia. Apparently, her resignation had been a long time coming, and I'd just been the catalyst. Marcus came over one evening with a 6-pack of beer to celebrate. We sat in my living room, now warm and comfortable, with my newly repaired porch visible through the front window. "Man, I still can't believe she paid for it herself," Marcus said, shaking his head. "That's like something out of a movie, I know. When Gerald told me, I thought he was joking at first. So what happened to her? Is she still living here, as far as I know? I haven't seen her around much, but her car is still in her usual spot. I think she's keeping a low profile." "Can't blame her. Everyone knows what she did. That's got to be embarrassing." "Good. Maybe she'll think twice before she tries to bully someone else." We clinked our beer bottles together and drank to that. The truth was, I didn't really care what happened to Patricia going forward. She was out of my life, out of her position of power, and she'd paid for the damage she caused. That was enough for me. Over the following weeks, the HOA underwent some significant changes. The board elected a new president, a retired teacher named Margaret Wilson, who had a reputation for being fair and reasonable. One of her first acts was to review all of Patricia's decisions from the past year and reverse several questionable fines and violations. The Johnsons got their Christmas light fine reversed. Marcus got his wreath violation dismissed. 3 other residents who'd been cited for trivial issues had their cases thrown out. Margaret also implemented new policies to prevent abuse of power. Board members could no longer unilaterally issue fines without approval from at least 2 other board members. Access to HOA equipment required logging and documentation. Security camera footage was now regularly backed up to a cloud service that multiple board members could access, not just the president. And residents were given a clearer path to appeal violations they felt were unjust. The changes were welcomed by almost everyone in the community. Property values remained stable, common areas were maintained, and the atmosphere became noticeably less tense. People weren't walking on eggshells anymore, afraid of getting hit with a fine for some made-up violation. As for me, Bill came out in early February to resurface my porch. He did a beautiful job, and honestly, it looked better than it had before the incident. I bought new potted evergreens, a new welcome mat, and touched up the paint on my door frame myself. By mid-February, you couldn't tell anything had ever happened, but I kept all the documentation. The photos, the videos, the emails, the formal complaints, the contractor estimates, and most importantly, the final invoice showing that the pressure washing and repair bill had been paid from Patricia Cunningham's HOA account. I had it all organized in a folder on my computer and backed up to the cloud, just in case. I wasn't sure if Patricia would try something else. Maybe she'd learned her lesson, maybe she was too embarrassed to cause more trouble, or maybe she was just biding her time. But I was ready either way. I'd learned a valuable lesson about documentation, and standing up for yourself against petty tyrants, even when they held positions of authority. One Saturday morning in late February, I was out front sweeping some residual salt off my newly resurfaced porch when I heard a car door close. I looked up to see Patricia loading boxes into her Lexus. She was wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and she moved quickly, like she didn't want to be noticed. Our eyes met for just a moment across the courtyard. I didn't say anything, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge her beyond that brief eye contact. She looked away first, closed her trunk, and got into her car. A few minutes later, I saw a moving truck pull up to her unit. Marcus texted me later that day. "Did you see Patricia is moving out?" "Yeah, I saw the truck. Good riddance. My wife says she heard Patricia's husband made her sell the place because he was so embarrassed by what happened." I didn't respond to that. I didn't know if it was true, and honestly, I didn't want to engage in gossip. Patricia's personal life was her business. What mattered to me was that she'd faced consequences for her actions, and that the HOA was now being run by people who actually cared about the community, rather than using it as a personal power trip. By March, Patricia was completely gone from Pleasant Ridge Estates. A nice young couple moved into her old unit, and they were friendly and normal. The husband worked in IT, the wife was a teacher, and they had a golden retriever named Cooper who became the neighborhood favorite. It was like Patricia had never existed, except for the stories that still circulated at neighborhood gatherings. The final chapter of the whole saga came in April when I received a letter from Patricia's lawyer. It was a formal settlement offer. In exchange for me signing a non-disclosure agreement and agreeing not to pursue any further civil action, Patricia would pay me an additional $5,000. The letter was very carefully worded, never actually admitting wrongdoing, but making it clear that she wanted to make this entire situation go away permanently. I took the letter to Tom Bradford, who was not only an HOA board member but also offered to review it for me as a favor. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and he read through it carefully while I waited. "This is interesting," he finally said. "She's clearly worried that you're going to sue her for harassment, emotional distress, maybe even pursue criminal charges. The $5,000 is essentially hush money. Do you think I should take it?" Tom leaned back in his chair, considering. That depends on what you want. If you sign this, you can't talk about what happened publicly, you can't pursue any legal action, and basically, you have to pretend this never happened. But you get $5,000, which is a decent chunk of change for what you went through. What if I don't sign it? Then you're free to pursue whatever legal action you want, but there's no guarantee you'd win or that you'd get more than $5,000 even if you did. And it would be time-consuming and stressful. Lawsuits are expensive and drag on forever. I thought about it for a long moment, sipping my coffee. You know what? I'm going to decline. I don't want her money and I don't want to be silenced. What she did was wrong, and people in this community deserve to know what kind of person she is. If I sign this NDA, I can't warn anyone else about her behavior. That doesn't sit right with me. Tom nodded slowly. I respect that. I'll help you draft a response. We spent the next hour at that coffee shop, crafting a polite but firm letter declining Patricia's settlement offer. We made it clear that I had no current intention of pursuing legal action, but that I was unwilling to sign away my right to discuss what had happened or to take action in the future if circumstances changed. Tom helped me phrase it in a way that was legally sound, but also made my position absolutely clear. I never heard from Patricia or her lawyer again after that. The whole thing just faded away, becoming one of those neighborhood stories that gets told at barbecues and homeowners' meetings. Remember when Patricia dumped snow on that guy's porch and ended up paying for the cleanup herself? It became a cautionary tale about karma and about what happens when people abuse their power. Life returned to normal. I focused on my work, hung out with friends, and actually started to enjoy living in Pleasant Ridge Estates again. The HOA under Margaret's leadership was functional and fair. We had reasonable rules that actually made sense, and violations were handled with common sense rather than vindictiveness. The change in atmosphere was remarkable. In June, the HOA held its annual summer picnic at the clubhouse. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and a huge turnout of residents brought food and drinks to share. I made my famous potato salad, which I'd learned from my grandmother, and Marcus brought ribs that he'd been smoking since early that morning. The smell alone was enough to make everyone hungry. I was standing by the grill, talking to Tom Bradford about a project at work, when Margaret Wilson approached us with a smile. Quentin, I just wanted to thank you again for everything that happened earlier this year. I know it was difficult and stressful for you, but the changes we've been able to make because of it have really transformed this community. I appreciate that, Margaret. I'm just glad it worked out the way it did. You know, we're having board elections in the fall. Have you ever thought about running? We could use someone with your integrity and willingness to stand up for what's right. I laughed. I don't think I'm cut out for HOA politics. I'm happy just being a regular resident. Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. The offer stands. She moved on to talk to other residents, and Tom chuckled next to me. She's right, you know. You'd make a good board member. Maybe someday. Right now, I'm just enjoying not having to worry about getting fined for breathing wrong. The picnic was a great success. People stayed until well after dark, sitting around talking and laughing. It felt like a real community, the kind of place where people actually knew and cared about each other. It was what Pleasant Ridge Estates was supposed to be all along, before Patricia had turned it into her personal kingdom. As summer turned to fall, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The whole situation with Patricia and the snow had been frustrating and expensive and time-consuming, but it had also taught me some important lessons. I'd learned the value of documentation, of standing up for yourself, of not backing down when you know you're right. I'd learned that sometimes karma does work, even if it takes a while and happens in unexpected ways. I'd also learned that communities are only as good as the people who run them. When you have someone in charge who's petty and vindictive and drunk on their tiny amount of power, it affects everyone. But when you have leadership that's fair and reasonable and actually cares about the residents, amazing things can happen. The pressure washing bill that came out of Patricia's account had become legendary in Pleasant Ridge estates. People joked about it, made memes about it, brought it up whenever someone complained about HOA fees. It was a reminder that actions have consequences, and that sometimes those consequences are perfectly poetic. As for Patricia herself, I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a condo in Hilliard, a suburb on the other side of Columbus. Apparently, she tried to join that HOA board as well, but was rejected when they looked into her history. The internet is forever, and word gets around. She destroyed her own reputation, and no amount of lawyer letters or settlement offers could fix that. One evening in October, I was sitting on my porch enjoying the cool fall air. The leaves were changing colors, orange and red and gold, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the courtyard. My porch looked perfect, better than it ever had before. The new evergreens in their decorative pots were thriving, the concrete was smooth and sealed, and everything was exactly as it should be. Marcus walked by, walking his dog, and waved. "Hey, Quentin, still enjoying that porch?" "Every single day," I called back, and I meant it. Every time I walked out my front door, every time I swept the porch or watered the plants or just sat outside with my morning coffee, I remembered what had happened and how it had ended. It was a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation and evidence matter, and that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor when it comes to delivering justice. The snow had long since melted, spring had come and gone, and another winter was on its way. But I was ready for it. I had a good snow shovel, a membership at the local gym to keep my back strong for all that shoveling, and the satisfaction of knowing that if anyone ever tried to mess with my property again, I knew exactly how to handle it. Pleasant Ridge Estates had become what it was always meant to be. A nice, quiet community where people could live their lives without harassment or petty tyranny. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable rules without making residents miserable. Property values remained strong, people took pride in their homes, and neighbors actually liked each other. As I sat there on my porch that October evening, watching the sun set and the streetlights flicker on one by one, I felt genuinely content. The whole situation with Patricia seemed like it had happened years ago rather than months ago. It was history now, a story with a beginning, middle, and end. A story where the villain got what was coming to her, where justice prevailed, and where a regular guy stood up for himself and won. The pressure-washing bill that came from Patricia's account was more than just a financial transaction. It was a symbol of everything that had happened, of karma catching up, of consequences being delivered in the most perfectly ironic way possible. Every time I thought about it, I smiled. Not because I took pleasure in Patricia's embarrassment or financial loss, but because it represented something important. The idea that people can't just do whatever they want without facing repercussions. Winter came again, as it always does in Ohio. The first snow fell in November, just a light dusting that barely required shoveling. But I was out there at 6 a.m. anyway, clearing my porch and walkway, making sure everything was perfect. Not because I was afraid of Patricia anymore, she was long gone, but because it was the right thing to do. It was my home, my responsibility, and I took pride in maintaining it properly. The HOA sent out the usual winter reminders about snow removal, But the tone was completely different now. Instead of threatening fines and violations, Margaret's emails were friendly and helpful, offering tips for dealing with ice and reminding everyone where the community salt supply was stored. She even organized a volunteer program where residents who were able-bodied could help elderly or disabled neighbors with snow removal. It was community building rather than community destroying. I signed up for the volunteer program and ended up helping Mrs. Peterson, an 80-year-old widow who lived 2 buildings over. Every time it snowed, I'd clear my own property first and then head over to her place to clear hers. She always insisted on making me hot chocolate and cookies, and we'd sit in her kitchen for a while, talking about everything from world events to neighborhood gossip. She told me stories about what Pleasant Ridge Estates had been like 20 years ago before Patricia, when the HOA had been run by people who actually cared. "You did a good thing, standing up to that woman," Mrs. Peterson said one snowy December morning. "A lot of people were afraid of her. She had this way of making you feel small, like you'd done something wrong even when you hadn't. My late husband used to say she was drunk on power, and he was right. I just documented what happened and reported it," I said, sipping the hot chocolate. "The evidence spoke for itself." That's exactly what needed to happen. Someone with the courage to actually push back and not let her get away with it. You changed this whole community for the better. I left Mrs. Peterson's house that morning feeling good about more than just the snow removal. I felt good about being part of a real community, one where people helped each other and looked out for each other. That's what neighborhoods are supposed to be. Christmas came and went. I put up lights on my porch, reasonable and tasteful, and nobody complained or threatened to fine me. I put a wreath on my door, whatever color I wanted, and nobody said a word. It was liberating to just live my life without constantly worrying about some petty rule violation. On New Year's Eve, Marcus threw a party at his place and invited everyone from our street. About 20 people showed up, bringing food and drinks and good cheer. At midnight, we all went outside despite the cold and watched fireworks that someone was setting off a few blocks away. We toasted to the new year, to good neighbors, to communities that actually work the way they're supposed to. As everyone was saying their goodbyes and heading home, Marcus pulled me aside. "You know, a year ago, I never would have thrown this party. I would have been too worried about noise complaints or parking violations or Patricia finding some reason to make my life miserable. But now I feel like I can actually enjoy living here, so thank you for that." "We all did it together," I said. "You backed me up, provided evidence, supported me through the whole thing. I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe, but you were the one who had the guts to actually fight back." That matters. Walking home that night, slightly buzzed from champagne and full of good food, I thought about how much had changed in 1 year. Last January, I'd been dealing with Patricia's harassment and the snow incident. This January, I was part of a thriving community, helping neighbors, making friends, and actually enjoying where I lived. The pressure washing bill remained the stuff of legend. New residents would hear the story and shake their heads in amazement. Some people didn't believe it at first, thought it was too perfect to be true, but there were enough witnesses and enough documentation that the truth was undeniable. It had really happened exactly the way people said it had. As winter deepened and we got more snow, I maintained my routine. Clear my porch, clear my walkway, help Mrs. Peterson, and go about my life. The HOA functioned smoothly under Margaret's leadership. Bills were paid, common areas were maintained, and everyone coexisted peacefully. It was boring in the best possible way. In February, almost exactly a year after the incident, I got an unexpected email from Gerald Morrison. He'd stepped down from the board in December, feeling that his time was done and wanting to let some younger residents take over. But he'd kept my email address, and he wanted to share something with me. Quentin, the email read, I thought you'd want to know that the Ohio HOA Management Association asked me to speak at their annual conference about governance and preventing abuse of power. I'm using your case as a primary example of what can go wrong when board members aren't held accountable, and how proper documentation and procedures can resolve these situations. I wanted to make sure you were okay with that before I did it. I won't use your name specifically, but the circumstances are unique enough that some people might figure it out. I wrote back immediately, telling him I had no problem with it. If my experience could help prevent other people from going through something similar, that was a good thing. Use the story, teach the lessons, make sure other HOA boards understand the importance of accountability and fairness. Gerald responded with thanks and said he'd send me a copy of his presentation when it was done. True to his word, a few weeks later, I received a PDF of his slides. It was titled Accountability and Governance, a case study in HOA management. He'd laid out the entire situation in clinical detail, explaining how things went wrong, how the evidence was gathered and documented, how the board responded, and what the ultimate outcome was. The final slide simply said, "The pressure washing bill came from her account," and I could imagine the audience reaction to that. Spring came again, bringing warmer weather and green grass and flowers blooming in the common areas. The HOA hired a new landscaping company, and they did beautiful work. Pleasant Ridge Estates looked better than it had in years. Property values went up slightly, and several units that had been on the market for months finally sold. People wanted to live in a community that was well managed and friendly. I celebrated my 3-year anniversary of living in Pleasant Ridge Estates with a sense of satisfaction. Despite everything that had happened, or maybe because of it, this felt like home. I'd made real connections with my neighbors, contributed to positive changes in how the community was run, and learned valuable lessons about standing up for myself. The new HOA board was doing excellent work. Margaret had decided not to run for another term, feeling that she'd accomplished what she set out to do, and a new president was elected. His name was David Patterson. He was a high school principal with a calm demeanor and a talent for bringing people together. Under his leadership, the board implemented even more resident-friendly policies and created more opportunities for community engagement. In June, I ran into Linda Chen at the grocery store. She'd also stepped down from the board, having fulfilled her term, and she was busy with her real estate business. "Quentin, how are you doing?" "Great, Linda. How's business?" "Booming, actually. And you know what's funny? I've started using Pleasant Ridge Estates as a selling point for other properties. I tell potential buyers about how we dealt with a problem board member, how the community came together, and how much better things are now. People love that story. Really, they don't see it as a negative. Not at all. They see it as a community that holds people accountable and isn't afraid to make changes. That's actually a huge positive. So many HOAs are dysfunctional and nobody does anything about it. We proved that change is possible. We chatted for a few more minutes before going our separate ways, but her words stuck with me. I'd never thought about my situation with Patricia as something that could actually increase property values or make the community more attractive, but it made sense. People want to live in places where things work properly and where they don't have to worry about petty tyrants making their lives miserable. As summer progressed, I found myself genuinely happy. Work was going well. I'd gotten a promotion and a raise in April. My social life was active and fulfilling. My home was comfortable and well maintained. and the community I lived in was thriving. Everything had worked out better than I could have hoped. The pressure washing bill became a personal symbol for me of why documentation matters, why standing up to bullies is important, and why sometimes the universe delivers justice in the most unexpected ways. I'd framed the final invoice, the one showing payment from Patricia's account, and hung it in my home office. Visitors would see it and ask about it, and I'd tell them the story. It never got old. By the time fall rolled around again, the whole incident felt like ancient history. A new family had moved into Patricia's old unit, their second year there, and they'd become integrated into the community. Nobody talked about Patricia anymore, except occasionally as a cautionary tale. She'd been erased from Pleasant Ridge estates as thoroughly as the snow had been cleared from my porch. I continued volunteering with the snow removal program, helping Mrs. Peterson and a few other elderly residents. I continued attending HOA meetings occasionally, just to stay informed and be an active part of the community. I continued maintaining my property to the best of my ability, not because I was afraid of fines, but because I took pride in where I lived. The story could have ended differently. If I hadn't documented everything, if I hadn't stood up for myself, if the other board members hadn't taken it seriously, Patricia might still be in power, making life miserable for everyone. But because people cared enough to do the right thing, because evidence was gathered and presented, because accountability mattered, the outcome was just. Years would pass, I knew, and eventually even the story of Patricia and the snow would fade into obscurity. New residents would move in who'd never heard of her. The community would continue to evolve and change, but the lessons would remain. Document everything, stand up for yourself, hold people accountable, and trust that sometimes karma works in mysterious ways. As I sat on my porch one October evening, 2 years after the incident, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt at peace. My porch looked beautiful, my home was my sanctuary, and my community was everything it should be. The pressure-washing bill that came from Patricia's account would forever be a reminder that justice exists, that bullies can be stopped, and that sometimes the bad guys really do pay for their actions. Life in Pleasant Ridge estates continued, seasons changing, people coming and going, the rhythm of community life flowing naturally and peacefully. And every time it snowed, I'd clear my porch with a smile, remembering how one winter storm had changed everything for the better.